The Sixth Sense: How to Develop Your Intuition. An original work created by Oscar Gonzalez for Biblio Studio. Chapter 1. The Secret Language of the Soul. There comes a moment in life when one realizes that not all knowledge arrives through thought. Sometimes a certainty appears that does not come from reason, a clear, undeniable sensation that arises without warning, without logic, yet carries a clarity impossible to ignore. It's as if something within you says, "This is how it is," even when the mind argues against it. That sensation, that silent echo that precedes explanation, is the voice of intuition, the secret language of the soul. The German mystic Jakob Böhme once wrote, "The soul has its own method of reasoning which the mind does not comprehend." And he was right. The mind analyzes, compares, seeks causes and effects, but the soul does not need to argue. It simply knows. It knows all the time, though we rarely listen. Its knowledge is not conceptual, but experiential. It does not express itself in words, but in vibrations, in nuances, in subtle movements of the body or mood. The soul whispers while the mind shouts, and since we live in an age of constant noise, of endless thoughts and relentless stimuli, that gentle voice is lost beneath the roar of reason. Intuition does not compete with noise. It simply fades until we choose to listen again. The Sufi poet Rumi said, "Silence is the language of the soul, all else is poor translation." In that line, he pointed precisely to where intuitive awakening begins. Intuition does not arise amid analysis, but in the spaces between thoughts, in the inner stillness we so seldom cultivate. It is not about ceasing to think, but about allowing thought to settle like dust upon a pond, until the water becomes clear enough to reflect the light. In that state of stillness, the answers you were seeking outside begin to emerge from within, effortlessly, as if they had always been there. That is the nature of intuition, not something you seek, but something you remember. The soul does not shout. It waits patiently for you to stop, to close the eyes of the intellect and open those of the being. The greatest obstacle to recognizing intuition is not a lack of sensitivity, but the confusion with other inner voices. It's easy to mistake intuition for impulse or emotion. Impulse arises from desire or fear. It is quick, urgent, anxious. It pushes you to act without reflection and often disguises itself as a gut feeling. But behind impulse lies tension, haste, and the need to control an outcome. Emotion, on the other hand, is a wave that rises and falls. It can feel powerful as a guide, yet it's volatile, shifting, ruled by circumstance. Intuition, however, has no agitation. It is calm, serene, clear. When something is truly intuitive, you feel a kind of peace, even if the decision it implies is difficult. There is no fear, no euphoria, only certainty. That is the difference. Impulse quickens the heartbeat, intuition steadies it. Emotion seeks an answer. Intuition already has it. The voice of intuition gives no explanations, but it leaves traces. Sometimes you feel it as a physical sensation, a knot in the stomach warning you that something is off, or an expansion in the chest when something resonates with your truth. Other times it manifests as a coincidence that seems random, yet arrives at the perfect moment. Intuition speaks a symbolic language that the soul naturally understands, even if the mind tries to translate it into logic. In truth, the soul does not reason, it perceives. And those perceptions, when not filtered by doubt or fear, are precise compasses. They may not tell you the destination, but they will always point you in the right direction. The problem is that in our modern society, we are taught to trust data more than sensations, external evidence more than inner wisdom. We believe that rational means real, and we forget that the invisible is the origin of all that is visible. In the ancient world, this was not a strange idea. The Greeks understood that there were different kinds of knowledge, and they considered intuition one of the highest forms. In the Temple of Delphi, the priestesses entered trances to answer the questions of travelers and kings. But that trance was not, as many believe, an act of divination. It was a collective form of expanded perception, an experience where individual consciousness opened itself to something greater. In the Greek oracles, the trance was not fortune-telling, but collective intuitive perception. The priestesses were, in a sense, instruments of a universal mind that spoke through them. Today, without temples or sacred vapors, that same capacity still exists within each of us. We simply no longer call it an oracle, we call it intuition. And though we no longer honor it with rituals, it functions in exactly the same way, as a direct channel of communication with the essential. Think about it. Every time you had a premonition that later proved true, it wasn't coincidence. It was the soul speaking to you, in a way that doesn't fit within temporal logic. Intuition does not follow linear time. It is simultaneous. It perceives patterns, energies, intentions, and translates them into immediate perception. When the mind grows quiet, intuition awakens, and the pieces of the world fall perfectly into place. Suddenly coincidences multiply, paths open, and the impossible begins to feel natural. It's not magic, it's alignment. It is the result of coherence between who you are inside and what you express outside. Learning to listen to the voice of intuition is, at its core, learning to trust yourself, not your personality or habits, but the deeper intelligence that dwells within. That voice does not need to persuade you. It simply invites you to remember what you already know. But to hear it, you must cultivate silence, not external silence, but the inner stillness, where thoughts cease their battle for your attention. When you reach that state, something within begins to guide you effortlessly. Decisions become clearer, relationships more authentic, and life itself seems to align without struggle. The soul does not seek to control, it seeks to express. Its language is not verbal or analytical, but vibrational, symbolic, essential. That is why intuition is so hard to explain and so easy to recognize when it happens. Intuition, ultimately, is the way the universe speaks to you when you dare to listen. It is the language before words, the knowing before thought. Sometimes it appears as a gentle certainty, other times as a pure emotion that moves through you without confusion. There is no need to understand it, only to feel it. The soul is always speaking. The only question is, are you willing to be silent enough to hear it? The soul is always speaking. The question is, are you willing to be silent enough to hear it? Chapter 2. When the heart thinks before the mind. For a long time, we were taught that thought occurs only in the brain, that the mind is the seat of intelligence and the body merely obeys. But that view, so deeply ingrained in modern culture, ignores something essential. The body also thinks, feels, and perceives in ways the rational mind is only beginning to understand. Every cell holds memory, every organ has its own language, and above all, the heart is far more than a pump of blood. It is a center of consciousness. The ancients already knew this. In Egypt, for example, the heart was believed to be the seat of the soul. In China, the ideogram for mind includes the symbol for heart, and in many languages, to feel and to know share the same root. This is no coincidence. The heart, quite literally, thinks before the mind, and now science is beginning to confirm it. At the HeartMath Institute, researchers discovered something remarkable. The heart reacts to emotional images 6 seconds before they appear on the screen. Even before the brain processes them, the heart already shows electrical and rhythmic changes that predict whether the image will be pleasant or disturbing. This means there exists a form of perception that precedes conscious thought. It is not magic or telepathy, but a deep biological sensitivity, an internal antenna capable of detecting information that has not yet entered the visual field. The body knows before you do. In fact, an old Zulu proverb says it plainly: the body knows before you do. That simple phrase contains immense truth. Intuition does not occur only in the mind. It happens throughout the entire organism. We are receivers of an invisible field of information, and the body, through its heartbeat, tension, subtle changes in temperature or breath, is the first interface of that silent intelligence. Think of the times you felt a gut feeling, a knot in your stomach, pressure in your chest, or a sudden wave of warmth. It wasn't an imaginary reaction. It was your nervous system responding to data the mind had not yet processed. Intuition doesn't float in the air. It's experienced in the body. It is the way the soul speaks to you in its physical language. Yet, since we live disconnected from our sensations, we rarely understand what it's trying to tell us. We were taught to interpret the world from the head, not from the body. However, when you learn to listen to those inner signals, you discover that the body never lies. The mind can justify, deny, or invent reasons, but the body only responds to the truth of what it feels. If a person gives off bad energy, your skin notices it before your arguments do. If an opportunity resonates with you, your body expands without needing to convince yourself. Bodily intuition is a wordless language, yet more accurate than any reasoning. Emotions, in this sense, are also messengers of invisible knowledge. They are not mere chemical reactions. They are vibrational codes that inform you of how your soul perceives each situation. Sadness tells you something must be released. Anger shows that a boundary has been crossed. Fear signals that you stand before the unknown. No emotion is an enemy. It simply needs interpretation. When you observe emotions without judgment, they transform into intuition. When you repress or rationalize them, they turn into noise. Listening to emotions is listening to the soul in motion. The more you develop that listening, the finer your perception becomes. It's not about living ruled by what you feel, but about using what you feel as a compass. The body and emotions are your antennas, but the heart is the central translator. Interestingly, scientists have also discovered that people with high emotional sensitivity, what psychology calls high sensitivity, process non-verbal cues 0.4 seconds earlier than average. Their brains and bodies detect micro-expressions, tone shifts, and subtle environmental changes before others do. That tiny fraction of a second might seem trivial, but in daily life, it makes the difference between reacting and responding, between foreseeing and regretting. Intuitive, empathetic, or highly sensitive people don't possess a supernatural gift. They simply have a perceptual system more attuned to the emotional field around them. And the fascinating part is that this ability can be cultivated. As you learn to inhabit your body, to feel without fear, to breathe consciously, to pay attention to subtleties, you expand your intuitive range. The body becomes an ever more precise antenna. There's a simple way to prove it. Think of an important decision you made in the past. Before taking it, you felt something. perhaps sudden calm or a weight in your chest. If you ignored it, you likely realized later that your body had already warned you. And if you listened, you noticed how everything flowed smoothly afterward. That is the difference between deciding with the mind and deciding with the heart. The mind calculates, the heart recognizes. The heart does not analyze variables, it senses coherence. That's why when a choice is right, you don't need to justify it. It simply fits. Inner peace is the unmistakable sign of true intuition. The science of the heart goes even further. The heart's electromagnetic field is about 60 times stronger than that of the brain and extends several feet beyond the body. This means the heart not only perceives internal information, but also interacts with the energetic fields of others. That's why you sometimes feel affinity or aversion without knowing why. Your heart is literally reading frequencies. When two people are emotionally in sync, their heart rhythms tend to synchronize, a phenomenon observed between mothers and infants, couples, and even groups meditating together. This demonstrates that intuition is not an individual act, but a continuous energetic dialogue among human beings. Learning to listen to the body's inner signals is not a technique but an attitude. It requires presence, curiosity, and a willingness to trust what you feel, even when you can't explain it. Every breath is an opportunity to reconnect with that internal radar that has always been active. You just ignored it amid mental noise. When you return to the body, life becomes clearer. You no longer force answers, you perceive them. You no longer seek signs, you recognize them. It's a subtle yet profound shift. You move from thinking about life to feeling it. And in that shift, intuition ceases to be extraordinary and becomes a natural way of being. Sometimes, when you pause and listen, the heart gives you answers before you even ask the question. It may come as a feeling of relief when you move toward what's right, or gentle resistance when you drift from your truth. That is the intelligence of the heart operating without words. It won't always tell you what you want to hear, but it will always tell you what you need to know. Trusting it is an act of humility and courage. Humility to accept that the mind doesn't know everything, and courage to follow a direction that perhaps no one else understands. Yet when you do, something wonderful happens. Life begins to synchronize with you. Coincidences multiply, decisions flow, and a serenity arises that no outcome can alter. That is what happens when the heart thinks before the mind. Chapter 3. The Inner Compass, the Science of Intuition. For centuries, intuition was regarded as a mystical quality or an inexplicable talent. Philosophers invoked it, artists followed it, and scientists feared it because it didn't fit within the molds of rational thought. But in recent decades, science has begun to take a closer look at this sixth sense that all of us possess. What was once mystery is now being measured in laboratories with electrodes, MRI scanners, and biological sensors. And what researchers are discovering is fascinating. Intuition is not superstition. It is a real, tangible, profoundly human biological process, a form of intelligence that operates at a speed and depth the conscious mind cannot reach. Today we know that we don't think only with our heads. The brain is not an isolated control tower, but rather a node within a network of intelligence distributed throughout the body. One of the most surprising areas in this regard is the digestive system. Scientists call it the second brain, but its technical name is even more revealing, the enteric brain. This system contains more than 100 million neurons, about the same number found in the spinal cord. It is a true brain within the abdomen, connected to the central nervous system by a complex web of fibers known as the vagus nerve. What's extraordinary is that this enteric brain not only responds to what we eat or feel, it also generates impulses, perceptions, and emotional signals that influence our decisions. In other words, part of what we call intuition literally originates in the gut. It's no coincidence that we say, "I have a gut feeling," or "something makes my stomach turn." Popular language often anticipates science. Our body has always known the gut thinks and feels. Within it reside neural circuits that process information independently of the higher brain, yet maintain constant dialogue with it. When you face an important decision, those circuits analyze millions of microsignals, hormonal, chemical, energetic, that your conscious mind doesn't even register. If something doesn't fit, the stomach tightens. If it's right, it relaxes. It's not magic, it's physiology. Your body gives you the answer before your mind formulates the question. The famous scientist Louis Pasteur left a phrase that seems written precisely to describe this phenomenon. Intuition is reason that has yet to speak. And he was right. What we call intuition does not contradict logic. It simply operates on an earlier plane where data has not yet been translated into words or reasoning. It is the silent intelligence that observes patterns, recognizes coherence, and anticipates outcomes without passing through the filter of language. Sometimes we feel an inexplicable certainty, a clarity that arises without argument. That is the moment when inner reason, still mute, tries to communicate through sensations. When you learn to listen, life becomes less confusing and more guided. But how does the brain know something before it happens? To answer that question, scientists began studying an intriguing phenomenon known as the presentiment effect. In several experiments, participants were exposed to random images, some neutral, others emotionally charged, without knowing what would appear next. The surprising result was that the brain's electrical activity changed seconds before the image appeared, as if anticipating the stimulus. In other words, the nervous system reacted before the event occurred. This finding challenges traditional notions of linear time and suggests that human consciousness may, in some way, access future or probabilistic information. Researchers still cannot fully explain it, but the phenomenon has been replicated in various laboratories around the world with consistent results. Something within us appears to have access to a level of perception that goes beyond the immediate present. These studies invite us to reconsider what it really means to think. Perhaps thinking is not only reasoning, but also perceiving from broader dimensions of the brain and body. Intuition may be the conscious manifestation of unconscious information processing, a form of intelligence that unites physiology, emotion, and energy. It is not a paranormal power, but the natural consequence of how our biology is designed. Nature, which wastes nothing, equipped us with a system to survive, adapt, and decide even before we understand. The sixth sense in this context is not a spiritual luxury, but an evolutionary mechanism for rapid adaptation. When we understand this, the relationship between mind, body, and soul is redefined. It is no longer about forcing intuition or seeking mystical signs, but about reconnecting with the body's natural coherence. Intuition flourishes when body and mind are synchronized. If your nervous system is saturated with stress or fear, the signals become distorted. If you are calm, the flow of information between brain, heart, and gut becomes clear. In that state of balance, you perceive with greater clarity what was once invisible. You are not predicting the future. You are reading with precision the network of causes and possibilities unfolding around you. Modern neuroscience now speaks of interoception, the brain's ability to perceive what is happening inside the body. Every heartbeat, every breath, every intestinal contraction sends constant messages to the insular cortex, a brain region associated with emotional awareness. The more you develop that interoception, through mindfulness, conscious breathing, or bodily awareness, the more refined your intuition becomes. Inner wisdom doesn't come from thinking more, but from feeling better. Intuition is the embodied mind, knowledge that arises when thought and sensation merge into a single experience. Curiously, many great scientific discoveries have also arisen through this process. Countless inventors and physicists have said that their most revolutionary ideas didn't emerge after hours of calculation, but during moments of disconnection, walking, sleeping, meditating, or daydreaming. In those moments, the rational mind relaxes, and the enteric brain, the heart, and subconscious associative networks come into play. What emerges is not randomness, but integration, information that was always there, simply waiting to be heard. When you begin to trust your inner compass, something changes. Decisions cease to be mental battles and become serene intuitions. You feel when something fits or doesn't, even without arguments. Your body becomes laboratory, radar, and map. And the most interesting part is that this compass does not fail when you are aligned with yourself. Science can measure electrical impulses, neurons, and brain waves, but what truly gives meaning to intuition is the state of presence. Only when you are present can you perceive the future. That's why developing intuition is not about learning something new, but about remembering the body's forgotten wisdom. It means allowing your three brains, the one in your head, the one in your heart, and the one in your gut, to converse without interference. The mind reasons, the heart feels, and the gut senses. When the three synchronize, your perception expands. You no longer search for answers outside. You recognize them within. And then you discover that the true compass does not point north. It points inward. Chapter 4. The Mirror of the Unconscious. Each night when we sleep, a part of us remains awake. While the body rests and the rational mind shuts down, another intelligence takes command, that of the unconscious. There, in that realm without clocks or borders, visions, symbols, and messages are born. Messages that, though they may seem absurd, contain truths reason cannot decipher. Dreams, intuitions, and the images that rise from the unconscious are like letters written in an ancient language. If you learn to read them, they reveal what your conscious mind dares not acknowledge. Intuition lives precisely in that in-between space. It is the bridge between the visible and the invisible, between what you know and what you don't yet know that you know. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, one of the great explorers of the human soul, understood this connection better than anyone. He said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." With that phrase, Jung summarized a profound truth. When you seek answers only in the external world, you remain trapped in illusion. But when you dare to look within, consciousness expands. What we call intuition is nothing more than that inner awakening, the moment when the unconscious ceases to be a dark adversary and becomes a mirror showing you who you truly are. Every authentic intuition is a spark of that silent dialogue between your conscious mind and your depths. The unconscious does not speak in words, it speaks in symbols, and symbols are not poetic ornaments, they are the native language of the soul. An animal appearing in a dream, a recurring figure throughout your life, a persistent coincidence, all of these form part of a code that connects you with your deepest truth. Jung called them archetypes. universal patterns emerging from the collective psyche, shared by all humanity across cultures and ages. That's why we dream of water when something within us needs to flow, or of flight when we long for freedom. The symbol is how the soul translates the ineffable into images the mind can grasp. But to understand it, you must learn to listen with your eyes closed. The Renaissance physician and alchemist Paracelsus expressed it with astonishing lucidity. Dreams are the laboratory of the soul. He meant it literally. Paracelsus observed that in dreams, realities are tested, emotions are processed, and healings are rehearsed, later manifesting in waking life. What reason cannot resolve, the unconscious transforms symbolically while we sleep. And often, that nocturnal alchemy translates the next day into a sudden intuition, an unexpected clarity, a shift in perspective. You don't know where it came from, but you realize that something within you already knew. It is as if dreams were incubators where the seeds of understanding germinate until they are ready to sprout into consciousness. The link between intuition and dreaming is not merely poetic. It has roots in the history of science. The Danish physicist Niels Bohr, for instance, once dreamed of a tiny solar system in which electrons orbited a nucleus like planets around the sun. That dream became the direct inspiration for his atomic model, one of the cornerstones of modern physics. Bohr didn't reason it, he saw it, and upon waking, he understood that what he had dreamed was an exact metaphor for the structure of matter. This episode illustrates how the unconscious mind can access forms of knowledge that transcend logic and deliver them to the intellect at the right moment. In such cases, intuition acts as a messenger between two worlds. The unconscious is an inexhaustible source of wisdom, but it requires a different kind of attention. It cannot be interrogated. It must be listened to. If you sit to meditate or analyze your dreams with the intent of figuring them out, they will likely slip away. But if you observe them with curiosity and without judgment, they begin to reveal themselves. It is like watching the moon's reflection on water. If the surface is disturbed, you see only fragments. If it becomes still, the full image appears. In the same way, the rational mind must calm itself to allow intuition to emerge, and that stillness becomes the fertile ground for self-knowledge. Many of life's most important messages do not arrive through reasoning, but through recurring symbols, a place that constantly appears in your dreams, a melody you hear over and over, a phrase that resonates for no apparent reason. None of this is coincidence. These are signals from the unconscious trying to make the invisible visible. When we ignore such signals, life tends to repeat itself until we understand. That's why some people relive the same conflicts again and again. Their soul is trying to show them something they refuse to see. Intuition is not only a gift, it is a responsibility. It whispers the truth before reality forces you to face it. The unconscious does not oppose reason, it complements it. Where logic draws lines, the symbol draws circles. Where the mind analyzes, the soul synthesizes. Together, they form a complete map of being. Deny one, and you live only half a life. When you learn to interpret your personal symbols, your dreams, coincidences, and gut feelings, you become capable of anticipating the movements of your own life, not because you predict the future, but because you recognize the patterns that create it. That is the true science of the soul, observing inner reflections to understand outer reality. Intuition, then, is not a vague feeling, but a mechanism of translation between the unconscious and consciousness. It is the spark that turns a symbolic image into concrete action. If you dream of a road, It may signal a change of direction. If you see murky water, perhaps something emotional needs to clear. The language of the unconscious is universal, but its interpretation is personal. Each symbol gains meaning within the context of your own life. That's why listening to intuition also means listening to yourself, without filters, without denying your emotions, without identifying with your thoughts. Intuition doesn't bloom in those who seek certainty, but in those who dare to live with mystery. As you develop this relationship with your inner world, everyday life transforms. Dreams cease to be mere nighttime curiosities and become guides. Coincidences turn into signposts. Emotions no longer appear as obstacles, but as compasses. You discover that the universe is always speaking to you. You just didn't know how to listen. And as you do, something within you awakens, just as Jung said. You no longer dream to escape the world, but to understand it. You no longer imagine to evade reality, but to expand it. The mirror of the unconscious does not lie. It reflects everything you are, even what you prefer not to see. But if you have the courage to look into it, you will discover that intuition is not an external phenomenon, but the manifestation of your own depth. It is the voice of the soul translating the language of dreams into daylight. And when you learn to recognize it, you realize there is no separation between thought, emotion, and symbol. All are part of the same consciousness seeking itself. To look within, then, is not an act of introspection. It is an act of awakening. Chapter 5. The Power of Sensing the Invisible. There is a kind of knowledge that does not come from reasoning, logic, or even accumulated experience. It arises from a deeper, quieter, and more primitive layer of consciousness, intuition. It is a form of intelligence that does not analyze. It feels. It often arrives as a pressure in the chest, an inexplicable urge, a premonition that cannot be justified with words. At times, that inner whisper seems to move ahead of events, as if the soul had access to an invisible network where everything is connected. Human history is full of examples showing how this silent force has saved lives, prevented tragedies, or revealed truths that the rational mind could never have anticipated. During World War I, amid the horror of the French trenches, a soldier named Jean Pujol experienced something that still puzzles researchers today. One dawn, as he was talking with his comrades, he suddenly felt an irresistible impulse to move. He didn't know why, but something inside him screamed to get out. He acted without thinking. He stood up and ran to another trench just a few meters away. Seconds later, a shell landed exactly where he had been. No logic could have anticipated that act. There was no warning, no sound, no shadow to justify his movement, only a visceral feeling, an inner alarm impossible to explain. Pujol survived thanks to a pure act of intuition, as if some part of him had sensed the vibration of danger before the explosion materialized. Stories like this are not rare in wartime, where life and death coexist so closely that the conscious mind cannot process the chaos. That is when another form of perception awakens, older than thought itself. Animals have it naturally. We have silenced it with centuries of rational noise. But it has not disappeared. It sleeps within us, waiting to be remembered. Intuition is, in essence, instinct fused with soul, an invisible radar that detects information beyond the physical senses. Almost a century later, in 2004, another chilling story revealed that same power. A woman in California awoke one night, shaken by a vivid dream. She saw a plane crashing into mountains and felt in her chest a fear that was not merely emotional, but physical. At dawn, She was due to board a flight to the East Coast. She fought the feeling, tried to calm herself, to rationalize, but something deep within refused to yield. Finally, she decided not to board the plane. Hours later, that flight crashed, with no survivors. The news left her frozen. She couldn't explain it, but something within her had known. Stories like these repeat again and again across the world, changing names and circumstances, but following the same pattern. The soul senses what the mind ignores. It is not magic or prophecy, but a form of sensitivity that captures subtle signals, emotional, energetic, or even biological, that the rational consciousness fails to register. Modern science has begun studying this phenomenon with growing seriousness. The neuroscientist Beatrice de Gelder, for instance, documented extraordinary cases of people who had completely lost their vision due to brain injuries, yet somehow could see without seeing. These patients could detect emotions in others' faces or avoid obstacles with no visual perception at all. De Gelder called this phenomenon blind sight, interpreting it as proof that the brain possesses alternative pathways of perception independent of the eyes or conscious reasoning. It is as though there exists a deeper sensory intelligence operating silently, processing subtle information that later manifests as gut feelings or impulses. When the rational brain goes quiet, another kind of knowing emerges. Perhaps that is why many people describe having powerful intuitions during moments of calm, sleep, or emotional trance. In such states, mental defenses lower, the noise of thought dissolves, and consciousness becomes more permeable to the invisible waves constantly moving through us. Everything in the universe emits vibration, people, places, even future events in formation. Intuition may well be the capacity to resonate with those frequencies before they materialize in time. In Central Africa, in several traditional tribes, this sensitivity is considered natural, part of emotional education from childhood. It is said that mothers can feel the precise moment their children fall ill, even from kilometers away. They do not see it as a miracle, but as a manifestation of the deep connection between beings who love one another. In such cultures, there is no separation between body, mind, and spirit. All are part of one living network. When a vibration changes in one point, the entire web feels it. That vision, which science is beginning to rediscover through the language of quantum physics and bioenergetics, suggests that intuition is not an isolated psychological event, but a natural function of interconnected consciousness. Perhaps the difference between them and us is not one of capacity, but of attention. In the modern world, we have been trained to trust only what can be measured, weighed, or proven, relegating intuition to the realm of the irrational. But intuition does not contradict reason, it precedes it. It is the first spark of knowledge before the mind translates it into thought. Every great scientific discovery, every act of art or profound love, is born from that inexplicable moment when something within you knows before it understands. Intuition is the seed, reasoning is the flower that grows afterward. If you look at your own life, you'll see that more than once that inner voice has spoken to you. Perhaps it was a hunch that made you avoid a certain road, a feeling of distrust towards someone that later proved true, or a sudden impulse that led you to make a crucial decision. In each of those moments, an invisible part of you perceived information your senses had not yet registered. And if you listen closely, you'll notice that intuition doesn't shout, it whispers. It manifests through subtlety, a chill, a sudden silence, a vibration in the chest. The quieter your inner world becomes, the clearer that voice grows. The most fascinating thing is that when you trust it, life begins to synchronize with you. Decisions feel more natural, encounters more meaningful, and obstacles less threatening. Not because the world changes, but because you align with a broader flow of information. Intuition places you in the right place at the right time, effortlessly. Just as Jean Pujol moved seconds before the blast, or the woman from the dream avoided the doomed plane, we all have access to that inner radar. We only need to remember how to listen. The mind analyzes fragments, intuition perceives the whole. Where reason sees chance, intuition sees connection. Where intellect doubts, the heart already knows. It's not about abandoning logic, but about complementing it with that silent wisdom that lies beyond thought. To live from intuition is to live aligned with the invisible pulse of the universe, to allow the soul to take part in your everyday decisions, recognizing that a greater intelligence is flowing through you, ready to guide you, if only you pause long enough to feel it. Chapter 6. Ancestral Wisdom and Expanded Perception. Long before modern science or laboratories existed, ancient peoples developed an understanding of the world that did not rely on rational analysis, but on a broader and subtler form of perception. For them, intuition was not a mystery, nor a privilege of a few, but a practical tool, one used to navigate life, to hunt, heal, foresee the weather, or make decisions. It was a cultivated skill, practiced with discipline and reverence, considered as real as the physical senses. In those cultures, knowledge was not accumulated, it was listened to. It was not about seeking answers, but about tuning in to a wisdom already present in nature, waiting to be perceived. An ancient Gnostic inscription found at Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt reads, "There is an eye that sees without looking." That phrase, carved nearly 2,000 years ago, captures the heart of intuitive perception. The Gnostics believed that the human soul possessed an inner organ of vision, a capacity to perceive truths that the intellect could not grasp. They were not referring to a physical eye, but to a form of expanded consciousness, a way of seeing from within. According to them, this inner eye could awaken through silence, contemplation, and purification of thought. In their view, true knowledge did not come from books, but from remembering what the soul already knew before birth. That same idea, that there exists a vision without sight, appears in traditions as distant as Taoism, shamanism, and the indigenous cultures of the Pacific. In the Tao, intuition was not a mystical gift, but the natural result of inner harmony. Taoist monks practiced a breathing technique called Xin Ting, which literally means listening with the heart. These slow, circular breaths sought to quiet the mind until the body became porous, receptive. They said that when the ear of the heart opened, one could perceive the flow of qi, the vital energy, in the trees, the winds, and even in the emotions of others. It was not magic, but attunement, a calibration of the body to sense what has always been there, though the distracted mind fails to hear it. In many ancestral cultures, intuition was trained the same way sight or hearing were trained. Instead of collecting data, wise teachers taught their students to observe without interfering, to remain alert to the whisper of the environment. In Africa, hunters knew when to move only by the imperceptible change in the silence of the jungle. In the Arctic, the Sami could navigate by the texture of the wind. In all of them, intuition was untamed intelligence, as an old Sami proverb reminds us. Instinct is intelligence not yet domesticated. It was not something irrational, but the purest form of wisdom, older than structured thought, born from direct contact with life itself. The Australian Aboriginal peoples, in turn, preserve one of the most sophisticated intuitive traditions on Earth, the songlines. These are invisible routes crossing the continent, not followed through maps or compasses, but through songs. Each line corresponds to a sacred story, recounting the journey of the ancestral creators during the dream time, and initiates memorize them by singing them in dreams or trance states. When an Aboriginal person walks through the desert, they do not follow a visible path. They navigate by resonance. Their song guides their steps, for every word is linked to a geographic and energetic point in the landscape. Some walk thousands of kilometers, following only that inner melody. This method, blending memory, intuition, and spiritual connection, is one of the purest expressions of what could be called expanded perception. It is not faith, but synchrony between human being and earth. Where our culture sees an empty plain, they see a vibrant map woven of energy and meaning. What unites all these traditions is a fundamental understanding. Intuition is trained through presence. When the mind grows quiet and the senses unify, consciousness begins to perceive subtler dimensions of reality. Instead of seeking information outward, the ancient sage turned inward, toward the source that connects everything to everything. It was not about belief, but about feeling. It was not a religion, but a way of living. If we look closely, that wisdom still lives in small daily practices passed down from those cultures: Zen meditation, mindfulness, conscious breathing, active listening, ecstatic dance, or even artistic improvisation. All share the same principle: trust in the spontaneous intelligence of the present moment. When we stop controlling, something greater takes the lead. In that state, answers arise on their own, decisions align effortlessly, and life seems to speak to us through symbols, coincidences, and signs. Paradoxically, what we call modern is rediscovering what ancient civilizations already knew. The neuroscience of the 21st century, with its research on the heart, the gut, and brain waves, is validating what Taoist monks and Gnostic mystics intuited millennia ago: that the mind is not the only way of knowing. The brain is not the center of consciousness, but its interpreter. True perception occurs throughout the entire organism, within the electromagnetic network that we are. Ancestral wisdom reminds us that intuition is not an isolated phenomenon within the individual, but a process of communication between the human being and the whole. That is why, when the ancients taught their apprentices to see without looking, or to listen with the heart, what they were truly showing them was how to reintegrate into the fabric of the world. In that state, the environment ceases to be foreign. The trees, the wind, the animals, and the emotions of others become extensions of oneself. And then, intuition ceases to be an occasional event and becomes a continuous way of inhabiting the present. Perhaps the greatest difference between ancient wisdom and modern thought lies in their relationship with mystery. Modern knowledge seeks to control, define, and dissect everything. Ancient cultures, in contrast, lived with the unknown as with a close friend. They knew that mystery is not meant to be solved, but to be listened to. That attitude of humility toward life was what opened the doorway to intuition. When you accept that you do not know, the soul begins to remember. Perhaps that is why the ancient human could walk for days without getting lost, heal without instruments, or read the weather by watching the clouds for seconds. It was not a supernatural gift. It was a trained sensitivity, the fruit of thousands of years of communion with the earth. We too possess it, only dormant, numbed by speed and noise. Recovering it does not require complex techniques, but silence, presence, and trust. It means feeling once more the pulse of the world beating in rhythm with your heart. It means walking, like the Aboriginal ancestors, guided by the inner song that never stopped playing, waiting for us to remember its melody. Perhaps that is the true definition of intuition, an ancient conversation between the soul and the universe, interrupted by centuries of distraction, yet always ready to resume the moment we remember how to listen. Chapter 7. The Paradox of Knowledge. We live in the age of knowledge. Never before has humanity had access to so much information, so many books, data, theories, and answers just a click away. Yet never before have we been so disconnected from inner wisdom. The more we know, the harder it becomes to hear the silent voice that rises from the depths of the soul. And that is precisely the great paradox of knowledge. The accumulation of rational understanding can weaken intuition. An excess of information creates noise, and noise silences the whisper. We become experts in concepts, yet illiterate in perception. We know much about life, but we feel it less and less. The so-called paradox of the wise, cited since antiquity, holds that the more a person knows, the less they trust their intuition. Rational knowledge tends to create an illusion of control. We believe that by understanding causes, we can master effects, that if we analyze enough, we will find truth. But life, in its unpredictable nature, mocks our schemes. That is why sages of all eras have insisted that true understanding begins where thought ends. The philosopher Plotinus expressed it precisely: where logic ends, truth begins. Reason can lead us to the door, but it cannot cross it. Intuition is that step beyond the threshold, a leap not taken with the feet, but with the soul. Throughout history, we have confused knowing with understanding, accumulating data with seeing clearly. Yet the analytical mind, brilliant as it may be, cannot replace the living experience of consciousness. Knowing that fire burns is not the same as feeling its warmth on your skin. We can read 1,000 books about love and still not know how to love. We can study the laws of physics and still fail to grasp the grace with which a leaf falls. Intuition belongs to that realm where knowledge ceases to accumulate and becomes presence. It is not about adding, but releasing. Not about thinking more, but thinking less. The wisdom of not knowing, that humility before mystery, is the necessary condition for intuition to bloom again. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "There is more wisdom in your skin than in your mind." In that brief yet provocative phrase lies a universe of meaning. The skin, in this context, represents immediate sensitivity, the ability to feel the world before translating it into ideas. The mind calculates, the skin perceives. The skin does not doubt, it senses. Perhaps that is the difference between intellectual knowledge and intuitive knowing. The former relies on thought, the latter on embodied presence, on a total awareness that bypasses reasoning. When Nietzsche spoke of the wisdom of the skin, he was reminding us of something primitive cultures never forgot. The body is not merely a vehicle, it is an instrument of knowledge. Every cell, every sensation, every vibration holds information the conceptual mind cannot process. That is why the more we disconnect from the body, the farther we drift from intuition. The problem is not knowledge itself, but the kind of relationship we maintain with it. Instead of using it as a map, we mistake it for the territory. We cling so tightly to our ideas that we no longer see beyond them. The more theories we accumulate, the less room we leave for mystery. And intuition needs space. It needs emptiness. Excessive knowing produces a kind of blindness by saturation. We label, classify, and judge everything before we truly feel it. We become prisoners of our own conclusions, and little by little, we lose the capacity for wonder. Not knowing, on the other hand, is not ignorance. It is a higher form of receptivity. It is the mind in its purest state, open, silent, free of the urge to control. In that state, intuition manifests naturally, like the reflection of a lake when the water is still. The great inventors, artists, and mystics all knew this. After long hours of reasoning, there came a moment when they stopped thinking, and precisely then, when they surrendered the need to understand, inspiration appeared. Albert Einstein described it simply: the intellect has little to do on the road to discovery. The leap comes from intuition. Though we need not quote him directly here, his example perfectly illustrates this paradox. The deepest comprehension arrives when the rational mind surrenders. Rational knowledge is useful, but partial. It builds bridges, but cannot cross them. It provides tools, but not direction. Intuition, on the other hand, orients. It is the sense that knows without calculation. When a decision is made from over-analysis, it often leads to doubt. When it is made from intuition, it brings peace. Intuition does not debate. It recognizes. It does not explain. It reveals. The paradox is that the path toward inner wisdom does not involve adding more information, but unlearning, releasing rigid beliefs, inherited ideas, automatic interpretations. In essence, all true learning is an act of forgetting what we think we know in order to see with new eyes. The mystics called it the via negativa, the negative path. It is not about accumulating truths, but releasing falsehoods. The emptier the mind, the greater the space for clarity. That is why the great spiritual masters always taught the art of not knowing, of living in the question. "What is this?" asked the Zen monks as they gazed at a flower or a stone, not seeking an answer, but a connection. Because when the mind stops defining, the soul begins to understand. Recovering the wisdom of not knowing in modern life is an act of courage. It means accepting that not everything can be explained, and that truth does not always take the shape of an argument. It means trusting again in that silent guidance that is not based on data, but on inner resonance. When we release the obsession to understand, things begin to understand themselves. Intuition does not impose itself. It reveals itself when knowledge falls silent. And to be silent, we sometimes must walk back through the path of excess, reducing noise, listening to the body, breathing, being present without needing to name. In reality, knowledge and intuition are not enemies. They are two phases of the same dance. The mind gathers details. Intuition integrates them into wholeness. The mind observes the tree. Intuition sees the forest. One without the other is incomplete. But when knowledge becomes arrogant, when it forgets its humble root in mystery, it loses its creative power and turns into an obstacle. Only when the wise admit that they do not know do they recover their wisdom. That is why the true sages are not those who understand everything, but those who have learned to listen to the silence between ideas. In that silence, intuition flourishes. It is the space where truth breathes without being named. And perhaps in the end, that is the deepest lesson of the paradox of knowledge, that authentic knowing does not consist in having answers, but in keeping alive the capacity for wonder. Chapter 8. The Art of Silent Perception. There is a way of listening that does not require ears, a vision that does not pass through the eyes, a kind of understanding that does not arise from thought. It is the art of silent perception, a way of reading the world beyond words, of sensing the truth that vibrates behind gestures, silences, and presences. We live in a noisy age, not only of sounds, but of stimuli, distractions, and thoughts shouting inside the skull. Yet intuition, that subtle sense which perceives what escapes ordinary senses, is not activated in noise, but in silence. Only when the mind becomes still can the invisible begin to speak. The ancient Sufis knew this well. "He who listens without ears hears the invisible," said a proverb their masters repeated in their teaching circles. It was not a poetic metaphor, but a real practice. To learn to hear the invisible was to learn to read the vibration behind events, to feel truth beyond language. Today, science is beginning to approach that frontier, albeit timidly. Studies in neuroperception have shown that micro-expressions, those almost imperceptible muscle movements that last less than 1/25th of a second, can be unconsciously perceived by trained or highly empathetic observers. The conscious mind has no time to process them, but the body does. The result is a sensation without apparent reason, a subtle discomfort or a silent certainty that, if one knows how to listen inwardly, reveals the other person's true emotion before they ever confess it. The musician Jimi Hendrix summed it up like a modern sage: "Knowledge speaks, but wisdom listens." In a few words, what the intellect strives to master through effort, intuition grasps in stillness. It is not about learning more, but about learning to be quiet. Zen monks practice this through koans, impossible questions such as, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" They do not seek logical answers. They push the mind to surrender. When reason breaks, a wordless kind of understanding arises, a pure perception. In those moments of mental emptiness, intuition not only appears, it becomes the natural form of consciousness. A modern scientific curiosity confirms this ancient wisdom. Too much concentration blocks intuition. An empty mind amplifies it. Research on creativity shows that moments of illumination occur most often when the brain enters alpha or theta states, waves associated with relaxation, daydreaming, or meditation. In those moments, the right hemisphere, more intuitive and holistic, leads the process. In other words, when you stop seeking the answer finds you. Silence, then, is not absence. It is amplified presence. Within it, subtle vibrations become audible, emotional nuances tangible, and the invisible begins to take shape. It is the fertile ground where deep perception germinates. In Japanese Zen temples, disciples would spend years learning to observe a leaf falling, to hear the sound of the wind through bamboo, to listen to the master's breathing without him uttering a word. That kind of observation is not passive, it is a loving attention, stripped of the desire to understand. The master knew that only those who can look without judging can truly see. The same applies to daily life. If one observes without intention, without trying to analyze or predict, one begins to notice the invisible layers of reality. A slight tremor in someone's voice, the pause before an answer, the direction of their gaze in silence, each micro-gesture is a language of the soul. Those who have cultivated silence can read it like an open text. The psychologist Daniel Stern called this phenomenon affective attunement, the ability to sense another's emotion without their expression. Mothers do it naturally with their children. Therapists, musicians, and lovers learn it through experience. In all cases, the principle is the same: to feel before thinking. But to access that level of sensitivity, we must deprogram the modern habit of reacting immediately. Amid the noise of judgment, inner commentary, and haste, intuition cannot be heard. That is why the deepest training does not consist of acquiring techniques, but of emptying oneself of noise. Some ancestral peoples, such as the Hopi or the Inuit, practiced what they called the silence of the earth, periods in which no one spoke for hours while hunting or sailing. It was not superstition, but sensory strategy. In absolute silence, the faintest sounds, the crack of a branch, the shift in the air, became clear messages. Likewise, in inner silence, the nuances of psychic reality emerge with clarity. One could say that intuition is not a gift, but a form of refined attention. We all possess it, but few listen to it because mental noise drowns it out. To train silence is not to isolate oneself from the world. It is to learn to truly hear it. When one begins to practice this, the results are astonishing. Conversations reveal more than what is said. Encounters feel charged with unseen meaning. Decisions become clearer without the need for reasons. It is as if an invisible channel opens between the soul and its surroundings. The key lies in understanding that silence is not the opposite of sound, but its root. Only when the mind is quiet can the universe speak. And in that wordless conversation between the visible and the invisible, true perception is born. Thus, the art of silent perception is also the art of trust. Trusting what you feel without needing to justify it. Trusting what you sense, even if you cannot prove it. In that inner space, free from thought, wisdom is not taught, it is revealed. Because silence is not emptiness, it is the oldest voice of the soul, waiting to be heard. Chapter 9. Creative Intuition, the Power of Imagining the Real. All creation begins in an invisible territory. Before the word, the melody, or the formula, there is a silent spark, an inner vision that seems to come from nowhere, yet contains everything. That is what we call creative intuition, the subtle current that turns imagination into matter. Intuition is not only a moral guide or an emotional compass, it is also the heart of invention. The history of art, science, and philosophy is filled with moments in which the irrational opened paths that logic could never have reached. It is the energy that makes a painter depict what does not yet exist, a composer hear a melody no one has played, or an inventor see the shape of the future as if it were already built. Ancient Hermetic texts expressed it precisely. The knowledge of the soul is not learned, it is remembered. In other words, inspiration is not acquired, but unveiled. To create is not so much to produce something new as to allow something hidden to emerge through you. Intuition is the key that opens that door between the inner world and the visible one. Hilma of Klint, pioneer of abstraction long before Kandinsky, said her paintings were dictated by spiritual beings. She did not see them as personal inventions, but as channeled revelations. She painted in a trance, letting her hand move on its own. Her canvases resemble blueprints of higher dimensions, living geometries where color and spirit merge. Astonishingly, many of the forms she painted in 1906 anticipated scientific concepts of energy, DNA, and vibration that physics would only formulate decades later. It might sound mystical, yet neuroscience is beginning to find parallels. During states of deep creativity, brain waves slow down to alpha and theta rhythms, similar to those of sleep or meditation. In those moments, the left hemisphere, logical and analytical, yields to the right, intuitive and associative, and the brain begins to connect distant ideas, forming unexpected patterns. There is no linear reasoning, but a leap, a sudden convergence of meanings. A curious study from Leiden University found that mild fatigue produces more intuition than forced concentration. Apparently, when the mind is tired but relaxed, associative neural networks become more active, favoring creative connections. That is why so many ideas arise in the shower, while walking, or just before sleep. When we stop pushing thought, thought begins to flow on its own. In this sense, intuition is like an underground river. You cannot force its current, but you can clear the stones that block it. Excess control, logic, or fear often dam it. In contrast, trust, playfulness, and wonder set it free. That is why art and childhood are so closely linked. Both arise from a way of seeing without filters. An old Nordic proverb said, "Artistic instinct is intuition in motion." There is no better definition. When an artist creates, their body becomes an antenna translating the invisible into tangible form. Dance, painting, writing, or technological invention are but different movements of that same inner current. But this intuition does not belong only to artists. Every human being carries it within. The entrepreneur who envisions a product before it exists, the teacher who adapts a lesson to an unspoken need, the doctor who feels a diagnosis before confirming it, all are connecting to the same creative principle. Intuition does not distinguish between disciplines. It is the common language of the soul in action. Perhaps that is why spiritual traditions have always seen imagination as a sacred organ. In Sufism, it is called Alam al-Mithal, the imaginal world, an intermediate dimension where the invisible takes form before manifesting. Henry Corbin, its great scholar, said that imagination is not fantasy but perception, a way of seeing reality in its germinal state. What the physical eye cannot perceive, intuition imagines to bring into being. In practice, cultivating creative intuition involves unlearning more than learning. The creative process is nourished not only by technique, but by empty spaces. A painter cannot hear the muse if they fear staining the canvas. A writer cannot write if they fear not doing it well. Intuition requires a leap of faith, accepting that you do not control the process, that you do not make the work, but the work makes you. In many biographies of geniuses, one pattern repeats: the moment of surrender. Beethoven composing in deafness, Van Gogh painting through pain, Curie working beyond her own understanding, all obeyed a voice that did not come from thought, an inner necessity guiding them like an invisible lighthouse. Intuition does not seek success or meaning, it seeks expression. And yet, there is something profoundly rational in its result. Intuition may seem irrational in origin, but it produces verifiable truths. Einstein said it without hesitation. There is no discovery without intuition. First comes an image, a sensation, a metaphor. Later, reason translates it into scientific language. Creativity is that marriage between two worlds, the soul that imagines and the mind that interprets. In Japanese art workshops, masters teach their students to let themselves be drawn by the brush. It is a lesson that sums up centuries of wisdom. The true work is not forced, it is allowed. The body, when freed from control, knows exactly how to move. The same happens with intuition. When you stop doubting, it knows exactly what to do. Sometimes inspiration arrives disguised as an accident, a brushstroke that runs, a phrase that writes itself, a note that sounds out of place. Yet if one follows it, a deeper path is revealed. Intuition operates in those detours. Mistakes are its gateways. Where the mind sees failure, the soul sees revelation. Cultivating creative intuition is learning to trust what is not yet seen. It is looking at the blank canvas, and knowing it already contains all forms. It is closing your eyes and feeling that the melody is waiting for you in the silence. There is no chance, only alignment. When the mind surrenders, reality cooperates. Because every true creation is not an invention, but a remembrance, something that already existed in a subtle plane and through intuition becomes visible. As an ancient Egyptian sage wrote millennia ago, the soul does not learn, it remembers. To create is to remember who you are when you do not doubt. And that moment, brief, luminous, inevitable, when the invisible becomes real, is the instant when the universe uses you to contemplate itself. Chapter 10. Awakening the Sixth Sense. There comes a moment in life when one realizes that intuition is not a privilege reserved for a few, but a natural function we all possess. It is not a mysterious gift nor an esoteric talent. It is a forgotten form of intelligence, an inner organ that is atrophied under the weight of noise, speed, and rational thought. In many shamanic cultures, this is precisely what is taught. The sixth sense is not a gift, but an organ weakened by haste. And once we begin to understand it that way, the path of recovery opens before us. Awakening intuition is not about learning something new, but unlearning what disconnects us, doubt, overanalysis, and the constant need to control and predict. The sixth sense blossoms when we release the obsession with being right and allow ourselves to feel before thinking. It is a return to primary trust, to the innate wisdom of the body, the heart, and the soul. When the mind falls silent, the universe explains itself. So said the Zen monks of the 15th century. And it is no metaphor. When the mind quiets, brain waves change. In that inner silence, the brain shifts from fast beta frequencies associated with alertness and worry to the slower theta waves, the same that appear in mystical, meditative states or just before sleep. In that state, the boundary between conscious and unconscious dissolves, and a calm clarity emerges, a knowing that needs no argument. Theta waves are, according to neurophysiologists, the fertile ground of intuition. They allow access to hidden patterns, deep memories, and creative associations impossible for the logical mind. That is why many contemplative traditions, from Amazonian shamans to Tibetan monks, developed practices to induce this state of consciousness. They did not do it to escape the world, but to listen to what the world truly says when mental noise fades. Awakening the sixth sense, then, is not achieved through effort, but through presence. It is not about seeking visions or signs, but learning to interpret without fear what is already there. The universe speaks to us constantly, through coincidences, sudden emotions, dreams, synchronicities, physical sensations. But only those who can hear the silence can understand its language. The first step is to re-educate attention. Most people live projected outward, consumed by stimuli, screens, and obligations. Intuition, however, is nourished by inner space. It does not need more information, but less. That is why the most powerful exercises are the simplest. Walking without music, gazing at the sky without purpose, breathing deeply until the body aligns with the moment. In those instants, something subtle happens. The mind decompresses and perception sharpens. The second step is learning to trust bodily sensations. Intuition does not arrive as an ethereal voice, but as a micro-movement, an expansion or contraction, a tingling, a pressure in the chest, or a soft impulse of peace. The body speaks before thought, and its messages are direct. A right decision often feels like relief, lightness, or quiet certainty. A wrong decision, though seemingly logical, leaves a trace of discomfort or inner constriction. Observing these nuances is how you train your intuitive radar. The third step is to practice emotional silence. This is not about suppressing feelings, but letting them pass without attachment. When one identifies too strongly with an emotion, fear, excitement, or anxiety, the intuitive signal becomes distorted. But if you learn to observe without reacting, emotions turn into messengers, not obstacles. Inner calm is not coldness, it is lucidity. The fourth step is to interpret without fear. Intuition speaks in symbols, metaphors, sensations. A dream may show you a door, a voice may whisper a word, or you may feel an inexplicable aversion toward a situation. There is no need to understand everything at once. Interpretation is not literal translation, it is vibrational recognition. The mind wants to decipher, the soul only wants to recognize. In time, you will learn to distinguish between fantasy and a true signal. The difference lies in the feeling. What is true resonates. It does not unsettle. The fifth step is to act. Intuition strengthens through use, like a muscle. Every time you follow a hunch and it proves right, you reinforce the inner channel. Every time you ignore it and later realize you were right, you learn to trust a bit more. This process is not mystical, it is physiological. The brain learns through feedback, and each validation strengthens the neural network associated with intuitive perception. Hermetic texts written more than 2,000 years ago already warned, answers are not sought, they are remembered. And they were right. Intuition is not acquired from the outside, it awakens from within. All knowledge is potentially contained in consciousness. What we call intuition is, in truth, remembering without thinking. Ancient peoples lived from that connection. Hunters knew when to move. Mothers sensed danger before it arrived. Wise ones made decisions through resonance rather than logic. To live intuitively was to live in harmony with the whole. Today, the excess of stimulation has clouded that ability, but it is not lost, only dormant. To awaken it, you can begin with simple practices. Meditate a few minutes each day in silence, without trying to control your thoughts. Ask yourself a simple question, and observe what you feel in your body before answering. Write down your intuitions or dreams without judgment, to recognize patterns. Spend time in nature, where the mind synchronizes with slower rhythms. Avoid information overload. Intuition does not flourish amid notifications. With time, you will notice life becoming more synchronous. Signs will appear that seem guided. Decisions will clarify themselves. Coincidences will fit together like pieces of an invisible puzzle. It will not be magic, but alignment, the reflection that you are hearing the same thing the universe is trying to tell you. Mature intuition does not eliminate reason, it complements it. The mind analyzes, intuition reveals. One without the other falls out of balance. But when both cooperate, true wisdom arises, thinking with the heart and feeling with the mind. To awaken the sixth sense is, in essence, to come home. It is to live from the silent certainty that everything is connected, that every answer already exists before being asked. It is allowing life to speak to you without filters, with the serene trust of someone who no longer needs to understand in order to know. For the greatest act of intelligence is not to understand everything, but to remember what you have always known, that within you lives a vast, patient, luminous consciousness, waiting for you to pause long enough to hear it. And when you finally do, the universe no longer has to shout. It simply smiles, because you have begun to listen again. You have been listening to The Sixth Sense: How to Develop Your Intuition, an original work created by Oscar Gonzalez for Biblio Studio. Dear listener, thank you very much for joining us. With warm regards and blessings.